Hey everyone, welcome to session one, part B. So in this video, I'm gonna set things up and help you guys understand a couple of basic steps in handling GitHub repo. This video will be only focusing on GitHub repo. We're gonna cut the first session up to a couple of different parts. So that some parts, if you feel like you already got it, then of course feel free to skip it. With that being said, let's dive into GitHub repo. So this is a course repo we talked about in the first session, part A. And then you can see this is capstone folder. And under the folder, there's this thing called a readme.md file. So this table of contents things here that you're looking at right now, this is all what we call it a markdown file. It's basically a notepad that it's stored as a .md format. And because it is a .md format, the MD stands for markdown, that once you upload to GitHub, it will be rendered such as this. And of course, there are special way to write things. So you can see the links, the hyperlinks, bullet points, things like that. So this is just to help you out understand what is a markdown file and how do you take notes and how do you potentially write pseudocode, things like that. So let's go to a GitHub repo. And then the first time that you're logging here, you might not be able to see all of this. This is just because I'm logging to mine. If you have not logged in, obviously logging, you can use your own email. And then if you have not registered, obviously register using your own email. This is open source, it should be free. And top right corner, there's this create new button. So typically what I do is I create a new repository. So for the time being, I'm not going to follow any template. I'm just going to go directly to a repository name. And then I can say this is a template repo. Just as a example for you guys, right? Of course, for you, you can call it whatever you want, right? You can give a class name, you can give a project name, things like that. So let's move on from description. Description, you can type in something here. You don't have to. Maybe in this particular case, I can say this is a example of my repo. And then obviously you set as public. The reason this is the case is because when you send a link to me, whether if it's updating to the form or it's just showing me or just send me a link, an email or message, something like that, I will be able to see it, right? So that's very important. So you can please check this button. After that, you can also initialize a README file. This is just for standard habit. If you have not clicked on this, you can always create it later on after this page. So if you have not checked this box, totally fine. If you check this box, that's totally fine as well. So for the time being, I'm not going to check this because I want to show you guys how to create this later on after this page is created. The git ignore, you can just ignore that for time being. This is for software production, so you don't have to choose that here. In terms of license, it depends on the project. If it's a class project, you don't really have to do anything here. If it's a project that you are working with a stakeholder, or if it's a project that is subject to certain licensing protocol, then obviously you can select something here. The typical go-to one that I personally like is MIT license. But in terms of this particular example, since this is just a demo and there isn't really anything secret going on here, so I'm just going to leave this empty. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to create a repository. And then as you can see here under my name, which is my account, you can now see this is a template repo. And that's the name that I just created. So in the beginning, you see something like this. This is just a complete blank. There isn't really anything here, right? So when you are here, you can then click on Start Coding with CodeSpaces. So you can click in that, and you can say Create. So it will then take you to this page. This is called VS Code. It is the same VS Code that if you are a developer or if you heard something like that before, or if you're a software developer, you're developing project locally, this can also be introduced locally. But for the time being, we actually created this page via cloud, and that's why here you see this repository link, github.dev. This is the cloud portal of VS Code that is already hooked up to your workspace, right? In this particular workspace, you have this is a template repo. So here is what I call a terminal window, and here is what I pretty much use command line language or command line interface to interact with everything inside of the repository, right? So let's start simple. First things first is we're gonna clean up this script. So what I'm gonna do here is Control L. So Control L, we're gonna clean up this terminal window, and then we can do an ls. This means I'm listing out what's inside of this repository. And as you can see right now, there's only a readme.md file. You can click on that. It will show you this new tab. And in this new tab, you see the title and a line of notes. And that's pretty much it. Now you see this title is italic. This means you are previewing this, right? You have not saved anything, right? If you type something here, let's say you wrote something down, I'm taking notes, then this is going to be regular font size. And it's going to change color because now you have modified something in this file. You will then have to save it. So to save it, use keyboard Control S, and then you should be good to go. So with that being said, the notes is here. That's how you open the markdown file. You can use this terminal to then commit this code into the repository. So before I do that, let me take you to the GitHub repo that we're just looking at. Now it looks like something like this. So this is the repository that we just talked about, that we just created. And then you see now here it actually says this is an example of my repo. The line that we just typed in actually is not in there, right? We have line 3 that's here, but it's not here on the main page on the URL, right? It's not live yet. So how do we make it live? That's the question here. How do we commit this change to the internet, right? So you will do that in the terminal window. So when I say terminal window, I'm talking about this button here, terminal, and then it's this space down here. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to check the difference. It's called the git space status. And it will say, hey, your branch is on the main branch, and then you can do a couple of things here, right? Let's take a look at what this means. You can add a file, and you can also restore. That's only if you want to. We're not going to do that at the time. And then you see here, it actually tells you readme.md file. It's modified. Modified means it has not been updated onto the web page, which is why this is not being updated. You can only see one sentence here, whereas in your development portal, you can see two sentences here. So let's commit that. The way to do that is you want to add a file first. So the way I typically do is git add space dot. This dot actually means I am adding every single modification, all the changes in the directory. Since here the only changes is this readme.markdown, then this works with me. Usually it's a safer way because you're not missing out on anything. right? So hit enter. And then now you add a file. Now you need to commit. The commit means you need to give a line of code and a line of message. So here say git commit. To enter message, you say -m, that means message. And then here you need to give a quotation. I typically like to do double quotation. So I use that as a indication that I am typing a message now. I'm not typing in the command line code. So the message here is, I have a new sentence added to MD file. And then you want to close out that quotation mark, just like that. So with that being said, now you can type enter. And then it will say, hey, there's a new sentence being added. There's a one file change, one insertion. So this is basically telling computer that you want to do this. Now you actually have to execute it, right? Meaning that you actually have to push this change to the cloud for this change to be taken into effect. So how that means is you do a git space push and hit enter. And you're going to see something like this. Says that says counting objects, 100%, obviously all that's done. And then it's going to tell a couple of lines of status. Once you see this, that means it's done, right? So now you can go to the web portal. So this new tab, and then you just need to hit refresh. So hit refresh, and then you can see that this is now taken into effect, right? Whatever this change that we added locally in our development portal, now it's being updated to the web portal, right? So people can see it, I can see it, you can see it. Now this is up and live. So that's how you make a change on Markdown file. And then that's what I consider a simple way of developing changes, making changes, developing your code from this environment and to the Markdown file. Now, this is just a Markdown file. It's not really code, right? It's not Python code, right? So let's clean this up. Let me show you guys how to do that. Let's do a ls to print out what we have. Currently, we have a readme.markdown file. It's just one file, right? It's not very organized. So if I'm going to start creating a bunch of Python script, that's probably not ideal. So I need to create a couple of folders. So in order to do that, I'm going to say mkdir. So this means make directory. So we make a directory, you can say projects. That means I'm creating a folder called projects. So on the left-hand side, let me zoom in just a little bit. You can then see that there is a folder. Right? This folder was not there before. You can also use this little triangle-shaped button to expand and hide what's in it. Right now, it's just an empty folder, so you don't see anything. But that's okay. You can change directory into that folder to create a subfolder. Like for example, your project 1, that can be a subfolder. Project 2, that could be another subfolder. So to change directory, you use the command line interface cd. That means change directory. So cd projects, hit enter. Then you are in the directory of not just the main repo, this is a template repo, but also the project folder. And if you don't know that, or if you want to verify that, you can do a pwd. That means print working directory. So you enter. And then it will tell you, okay, you're in this folder, you're under the folder called projects. And then I can also verify on the left-hand side, it'll take you here. So now I want project 1, right? So same thing, make directory, project 1. And then boom, there you go. You see project 1 here. Same goes with project 2. And now you can see that there are 2 folders down here. One small habit I want to remind you guys is try not to use space in the middle. You can use letters, you can use numbers, you can use underscore, places like that. I will probably avoid dash or avoid apostrophe or special characters, that will probably break the code. So just try to keep one word and use as little special characters as you want. So now there are obviously a couple of changes here that we already made that we have not committed to the cloud. Now you can, of course, repeat what we talked about before and commit the changes to the cloud. So the way you do that is you check the status. And then here it actually says up to date, nothing to commit. That is not true because you're actually in this folder. So you need to cd ... that means go up a level. So you hit enter, it will go up a level, meaning you're exiting the projects folder. Now you're in the main folder. And then you can then check another git status. And then it will say, hey, nothing to commit because there's nothing in here. All right, once we create a file in here, we're gonna have to make some commit. So let's try to create something in there. So the easiest thing that you can do is you say project one, you can right click. And I think first time you need to allow it. And then you can create a new file. And then here, let's say I want to create a Python script, right? So you can say test.py. So this is a Python script. Here it's actually going to ask you, do you want to install Python or not? I will leave that to you. When do you want to do that? At the moment, everybody is different. Some people are doing this locally in their own computer. Maybe they already have Python installed. That's up to them. Or they want to test it in here in the cloud portal. You can, of course, install it. For the time being, I'm not going to install it because I actually want to test the code somewhere else. So I am going to close that window and come back to the test.py script. And then I'm going to say define a function. Let's say this is my function. And then in the my function code, you can then give something, right? You can say A, B, and then say colon. And then inside of this function, you need to do something, right? You can say C equals to A plus B, and then you can return C. So what this means is you then create a addition function of which you take two numbers, you add them together, and then it becomes a third number. So it's a very simple function. Nothing's really happening here. And then we want to see how, we want to use this as an example to see how this works here. To make this function much clearer, right? This is going to work, but it's not that clear. We also want to use type hints. So the way to do that is use column, and you want to specify this as an integer, int. Same goes with b. You want to specify it's an integer. And then since we're adding two integers together, the return is only going to be integer. So the c is going to be integer. And then we also want to add docstring. So how that works is you give 3 double quotation, just like that. And then here you need to say input argument. And then you have to specify A is an integer, B is an integer. And then return is going to be C is also an integer. And then depends on your own taste. Sometimes people will also write out what its function is doing. So for example, you can say my function provides addition given two integers provided by user. So now this is going to be very clearly defined, and we know exactly what this function is doing. So with that being said, that's a function. Now what you're going to do is you want to test this out, right? Now, of course, you want to test it out here, but the problem is I don't think there's Python installed, right? So if you go to Python, actually there is Python installed. So let's see if we can test it out locally, and I also want to show you guys in the Colab. So this is the function. We are only defining this function, right? We have not invoked this function, right? So that's the problem. So how we're going to do that is we're going to give a couple of variables and we're going to try to invoke it. For example, variable 1 is 2, variable 2 is 3, and then variable 3, here we're going to invoke the function. So my function, variable 1, variable And then let's print it out, right? Because we want to see what the answer is. So here I'm actually going to say answer is bar 3. And I'm going to save the code. Now, let me exit out the Python. And then what I need to do is I need to get in here, right? Because this Python script lives in the project 1 folder. And then it lives in the projects folder, right? Which I'm not there right now. Right? So let's go in there. So cd project 1, and boom. So now I'm inside of the directory of where the script is, right? So to verify that, we can do a ls, and it give us the test.py. So this way we know that we are in the correct working directory. So since we have Python installed, now we can just test it out, right? Test.py. It's going to say answer is 5. So that's how you invoke this function here, and you can see that this is done correctly. Now let's make this a bit more interesting, right? This is variable 1, this is variable 2. It's actually hard-coded here. Hard-coded means that these are written inside of the script. You cannot really change it unless you change the script, right? So that's going to be a problem. So let's make that a bit more interesting by using input function. And here you can say enter a integer. Then goes with variable 2, enter an integer. Good. Okay, so now let's rerun this code. It will actually ask you to enter integer, right? So you can type in 5. You can hit enter. It will ask you enter integer again. Why is asking you again? Well, because you have 2 lines of code here, right? So after it runs line 16, it then is going to run line 17. And line 17 is going to ask you to enter another integer, right? That's written here. So you enter 6. And then here, it actually says answer is 5, 6. Now, here's the problem. And 5 plus 6, how does that become 56? And here's the problem. The problem is because we are not being very clear of the operation here, right? So we said here that's an integer, but the way that we run this code, this variable is actually going to be a string. And if you have 2 strings together, that is going to be basically saying this addition is actually becoming a concatenation. It's putting them side by side. It's not adding them together mathematically. So the problem here is because this variable 1, variable 2 is not an integer. So the way to do that is we're going to have to wrap this together. So whatever this input is, that need to be an integer. Same goes with the second one. Whatever the input is, that goes into the integer function and becomes an integer. And so this ensures that this a and b that we are defining here, once this var1, var2 being inserted into this function, it is a number, right? It's an integer. It is not a string. So now let's try to run this again. 5, enter integer, 6. Now this will give you 11. So that's a simple example of how to create a Python script. And now we want to commit this code to the web page, right? Because now this is just a Markdown file, right? And none of the stuff that we've done here has taken into effect. So this is in project 1, in project 2. Let me quickly create a Markdown file. I will say readme.markdown, and then I'll just call it hashtag project 2. And I'll say this is where the deliverable is for project 3. Save. So now I have a bunch of stuff here, right? I have a markdown file in project 2. I have a test.py script in project 1. I've done a bunch of stuff here. I don't want to lose that work, right? So let's clean this up. Let's go into terminal. Let's go cd. We're going to go to our main directory, right? Projects. Now we're going to say git status. And now we're going to see a bunch of things in here that has not been committed. So we do our usual trick, git add, dot, git commit. We're going to say files added for project 1 and project 2, close quotation. Now you see that these files has been committed, right? And last thing, we're gonna do a git push so that we want to push this code up to the cloud so that front end people can see it. So go back to your folder and then you say refresh. Now you see a project folder. You can click in there. You see project 1. You can click in there and you can see a test.py. You can click in there and boom, there you go. That is your function. So that's a quick demo of what does it mean when we say developing code in GitHub. And I'll see you in the next video.